Okay, let's stand for the Star Spangled Banner. Thank you very much, Mr. Helmuth. All righty. Are there any town meeting members who have yet to be sworn in? If so, please rise. Seeing none. I don't really have any remarks, so let's do our clicker test. So, as soon as Tim's ready. The Sea of Tranquility can be found on the moon. Oh, there's our timer. The Sea of Tranquility can be found on the moon. True or false? 1 is true, 2 is false. Yes, true. It was a landing site for Apollo 11 and the site for the first ever moonwalk. Recognize the Chair of the Board of Selectmen, Ms. Mahan. Quiet, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It is moved that if all the business of the meeting is set forth in the warrant for the annual town meeting is not disposed of at this session when the meeting adjourns, it adjourns to Monday, May 13th, 2019 at 8 p.m.
All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? So moved. Any announcements or resolutions? Mr. Quinn.
Good evening. On May 23rd, a Thursday at 2 p.m. at the Senior Center, the Council on Aging is sponsoring and leading a seminar or an event on financial programs to assist seniors. We're putting this together with ourselves, the Council on Aging, the Select Board, the elected state officials, Cindy Friedman, Sean Garbely, Dave Rogers, and with considerable assistance from the Assessor's Office. The goal for this event, again, is on May 23rd at 2 p.m., and we're looking for your help in spreading the word about that, is to increase awareness of various government-related and privately funded options that can benefit seniors. We want to encourage people who might be eligible to look into them more fully, and a lot of these things are fairly complicated and take a little while to understand and aren't particularly well publicized. So we want to make sure that we want to work for people to become aware of this and let them know that the Senior Center and the Assessor's Office as well stand ready to help them in that process. And we're looking to get people interested in seeing how they can benefit from this. I've been working on this. I'm on the subcommittee on this is my first year on the Council on Aging Board, and we set up a subcommittee in particular to focus on senior finances and the programs that are out there and that can be promoted to help them with this. For several years, I've been part of the AARP tax aid program every tax season at the Senior Center. And one of the programs that I saw there and that got me interested in this is the state-level senior circuit breaker program, for which seniors can get a credit from the Commonwealth, a check for up to $1,100, even if they don't otherwise need to file a state return if they qualify for it. One of the highlights of it when we do taxes for people is to let them know this is when they qualify for this. If they haven't been aware of it, it's a pretty good moment. They're always happy. Nobody's turned the money down. Then we let them know they can go back and file 2 years of amended returns and get another couple $1,000s. This year, doing that, we helped people get about $150,000 just from the people who came in and had their taxes done at the senior center. The idea of the program on May 23rd is to talk about that type of thing along with a whole variety of other programs that are available, some from the state, some through the assessor's office, and some through the Council on Aging at the senior center. And over the years, the town itself has been looking for more things that we can do as a town to help people out. And this is something that has stepped up more recently. There are 2 articles upcoming on that in the warrant, 38 and 43. That we will get to those when they come up, but in part those are meant to help seniors. All of these programs have various eligibility rules, applications processes. Not everybody qualifies for everything. Sometimes they overlap with each other. We want to let people know that these things are out there, that there's things that can help them, and then get them to come into the senior center or meet with somebody to try to help take better advantage of these things. We've been putting this together for some time. We're very excited about it. We intend to do this. This is the first one of these. We intend to do it on an ongoing basis twice yearly, spring and fall. This will be the first one, and we'd love to get a great turnout for it. Again, it's Thursday, May 23rd, 2 p.m. at the Senior Center. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am?
Caroline Murray, Precinct 12. I'm here to announce 2 meetings for next week in relation to the controversy surrounding the restorative justice process. On Monday, the 13th, the Diversity Task Force group meeting will be held at 6:45 at the Jason Cutter House. The town manager and the acting police chief will be attending for a discussion on safety and healing. Also, Thursday, the 16th, there will be a panel on racism, the criminal justice system, and the way forward, held at 7 p.m. at Calvary Methodist Church at 300 Mass Ave. The keynote speaker will be Sophia Hall, an attorney with the Lawyers for Civil Rights. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Leonard, Precinct 17. Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, every once in a while at town meeting we have an opportunity to say thank you to certain people who showed up many, many years and took a lot of responsibility. We've had situations where in the past we've been able to honor Elsie Fiore and the late Harry McCabe, who, as most of us know, celebrated 50 years in this hall of being a town meeting member. With your permission, Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I would like Mr. and Mrs. John Warden to join me up here for a special presentation, please.
Mr. and Mrs. Warden, he's going to embarrass you.
Very simply, ladies and gentlemen, in appreciation for the 50 years that he has been as a town meeting member, at all the things he's done, the responsibilities and dedication to serving town meeting, I hereby present to Mr. John Warden this little sign of town meeting appreciation.
Yes, I'm the trash lady.
Unless we're going to use this to rename Mass Avenue, perhaps the Wardens will get some of their way tonight. Here before you. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Any other announcements? The girls' tennis team selling cookies and good stuff. Go out and buy something. Any reports of committees? Article 3. And no reports of committees. Okay. Mr. Tosti, want to lay Article 3 on the table?
Move that Article 3 be laid upon the table.
All in favor of laying Article 3 upon the table, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? Article 3 is on the table. That brings us back to Article 58. We had a continuing list. Yes, sir. What's your point of order? Which one?
Well, there's only one been offered so far formally. There's one been offered on the email list.
No,
Excuse me, to the microphone. Yes, there's been one amendment offered before us, and there's another been posted to our website today. I have no issue with the substance of the amendment that's already been offered by our esteemed colleague from Precinct 10, but I question the process as it was not submitted under the 48-hour rule.
Go ahead.
Sir, every year, the first document town meeting members receive is the moderator's welcome letter. In it, he outlines procedures, including the 48-hour rule, and we began considering Article 58, the capital budget, on Monday. But even if we reckon from today, when we're going to be taking the vote, with all respect to our colleague from Precinct 10, we didn't receive the printed copies of his amendment by the start of the prior session, which would have been Monday. That's required. We haven't received them still. It instead appeared on the screen behind the moderator in a font size too small to read. Furthermore, we only received an email notification of the amendment yesterday at 4 p.m. So procedurally, I do not think we can allow this amendment. And similarly, our esteemed colleague from Precinct 8 sent an email to the town meeting email list today saying she hoped to make an amendment to 58 tonight, and we saw that posted at 6 p.m. tonight. So again, procedurally, I don't think we can allow that either.
So there's actually 2 amendments that we got today. Mr. Varoglu's amendment did come Monday. I ruled that one is going to be in order because I viewed it as a simple amendment. He was just line-iting out one thing, that's something.
Okay.
So that was skirting the edge of the 48-hour rule. He kind of falls into it because we're voting on it tonight, although I'm still unsure of that one. The 2 received today by Ms. Warden and Mr. Levy, I'm going to rule out of order. I received Ms. Warden's at 2 minutes to midnight last night. I received Mr. Levy's some point today. That was just, and they're both more than a simple amendment that's easily understood. And I spoke to both of them before the meeting, and I was going to tell them their amendments are not going to be allowed. They're going to be out of order because, one, the 48-hour rule. We've had that rule. These reports have been out. And if we don't enforce any rules, then we're just going to devolve into chaos. So I'm agreeing with you. But I was going to allow Mr. Varoglu's because I viewed it as simple, just a line item.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So I did tell them that they could present, and their only option was to ask the meeting if we would postpone the entire article to next Monday so that they would fall within the 48-hour rule. That would be up to the meeting. So in that sense now, are you going to take all 7 minutes, Ms. Warden? Or are you going to do it quickly? Then Mr. Levy's going to get up and give his rationale. But because they've already been ruled out of order, your only option is to ask the meeting to postpone, really.
Patricia Warden, Precinct 8. I move that line 4 of Article 58, number 6, be amended by adding thereto the following words: provided that the flooding issues are being addressed by enabling increased flow capacity for water exiting the Department of Public Works site at Arlington High School in such a manner that the Millbrook will flow unimpeded and without flooding at the Department of Public Works site and its abutting properties. Mr. Moderator, I just wish to say that this is this is putting the horse back in front of the cart. And there are very expensive projects about to be done in this area, and it would be very dangerous not to have this work done prior to those projects. And certainly, rainfall and very strong flooding conditions are going to get worse, much worse, not better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Levy? That's
Dave Levy, Precinct 18. I did make a motion to amend Article 58 last night, but as Mr. Moderator had said, it was within the 48 hours, and so he legally had to rule it out of order. But I'll tell you that I am asking for postponement because I think I do want to get a couple things on the record for discussion. I've been thinking long and hard about this capital budget, honestly, for about a year now. I think it's a good budget. I think it makes a lot of sense. But it also comes at the exact same time as we're about to build a brand new high school for the sum of $292 million, of which 200 is ours, 200 million that is. And I don't see how we can afford that amount plus a facilities building plus a senior center at the exact same time without putting financial stress on a lot of families in our town. And I say families because we, as we know, as it came up many times here over time, our town is predominantly residential. We do not have a commercial or industrial tax base to help absorb the capital projects that I would argue we should be doing. So my amendment is simple. It is simply to table or delay the facilities building and the senior center for 2 years. So we don't start them in 2020 or in the 2020 fiscal year, we start them into the 2022 fiscal year, so 48 months. Quite simply, I see the following benefits of that. The costs of these buildings together are $40 million. That's a lot of money. And the way I think about that is this. The debt service, just using a 20-year bond, 3% interest, is roughly $3.6 million a year. The town is going to ask for an override of $5.5 million. Therefore, 60% of that override, if you vote it through, will be spoken for by these two projects. If you add the cost of the library, which has now been inserted into the capital plan, within 5 years, the entire $5.5 million has been spoken for by these three projects. That's a fact. That's a fact. So the fact of the matter is this. Hold on, you'll get your chance. The fact of the matter is this. If you want to maintain services in the town, my fear is you'll have to go back again and ask the town for more money in property tax revenue. The way I think about it is this. Delaying to 2022 does three things. One, by then we'll know a lot more about the cost of our high school. Quite simply, I think there's a lot of contingency in that budget, which is good. But if they're wrong, even by a couple $1 million, we have some financial flexibility in our budget. Two, I think, as we've discussed, it gives us the opportunity, quite simply, to really improve our zoning for industrial and commercial revenue. Okay, we actually have a chance to really do what we said we're going to do and raise and give ourselves an opportunity to raise revenue from those two properties to pay for these projects. I think that's important. The counter argument would be that we need to move, people from the existing school to the facilities building as part of the school. But the way I think about that is this. If that was true, that means the school actually costs $320 million, not $290, because they're both the same. But that's not true, because we voted for a high school that costs $290 million on its own. So they can't be. So I think, again, asking for a delay is the right thing to do for our town. It provides financial flexibility, provides, we're building up the reserves in our general fund, and we're giving ourselves a lot of leeway in case we want to raise or reprioritize services. I'll give you one more example. Last year, our superintendent was asked by a town meeting member what she thought about the rate of school pay compared to other towns. And she said, and I would argue, I would have some agreement with this, that she thought at some point she'd like to take the salaries of our teachers up to comparable towns. That money has to come from somewhere. So we have to, again, if that's a priority for the town, we should have the financial flexibility to do it. But I truly do worry that if we over-leverage ourselves now, we're not going to have that opportunity, whether it's that or police or fire or anything else that comes across in the next 5 years. So all I'm asking is for a delay, 2 years, give ourselves financial flexibility to do better, and we'll come back and build these 2 projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Jameson?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. I'm strongly against tabling this article. Next, I believe the facilities, the DPW building and the senior center will be bonded for 30 years. So there's no way you could make it. I disagree with the previous speaker in that we'll be using it to pay off those buildings in the next 3 to 5 years. We'll pay them off as we do other building type things over 30 years, just like we will at the high school. Next, under number 1, in previous years, which we aren't doing this year, we have rescinded borrowing, and some of these may be appropriations. My question is, why didn't we rescind these borrowing amounts and or take appropriated funds and stick them into free cash like we do with the operating budgets for these items listed under number 1? That to me would be a cleaner way to do this.
Mr. Tosti, can you answer that question? Or does Mr. Pooler want to? Mr. Foskett's going to answer it.
Someone get up. I only have 7 minutes. Let's go.
Charles Foskett, Precinct 8. Under which number 1 are you referring to?
Under number 1 on the FinCom report.
Mr. Foskett, can you aim the microphone up?
Sorry,
Under Charles Foskett, Precinct 8. Why are we not rescinding these?
In the previous years, we've rescinded.
Okay, I got the question.
And or things that have been appropriated would go back into free cash.
I mentioned in my presentation that we have some new sheriffs in town.
Yes.
And there's a little bit more transparency and clarity in the budget. And in previous years, we transferred sums to offset, unspent sums, to offset the cost of the capital budget. And you generally see these if you look on Exhibit 3, I think it is.
I know we've done it in previous years.
It's still being done.
But
it's still being done.
That's my next question.
It's still being done. Yeah. But the point is that it's being explicitly called out in a vote instead of being transferred as a lump sum.
But we've never done this amount. This is $872,000 plus an additional $331,000 if you look at the bottom of.
But the money's 11. Already been borrowed. You can't.
Okay.
You can't throw it away.
Okay,
so we have to pay the bond people. So what we do is lower the overall cost of the capital budget using money that was saved from earlier projects. That's what this is all about.
Okay. So I'll just remain discontented.
But
I understand.
I don't know what we can do with the money other than you can't give it back to the bondholders.
Okay. I have another question actually. On number 2, I talked to Mr. Pooler about this. As I understand it, there's 2 buckets of money that were used to take for the Stratton renovation project. The one for the classroom that included the classroom modulars wonderfully was used less money than initially appropriated. And the building that we were supposed to sell is still in process. Good news, it's in escrow. So basically, for the folks in the audience, we're taking money from bucket 1 that wasn't spent and putting it into bucket 2 for money that has not been received yet. My question is, when we do get the money from the Mass Ave building sale, what are we going to do with that? Does that go in the general fund, or are we going to do this
So, let me just mention the reason for the different categories is that the new sheriffs have pointed out to us that we cannot, if money is borrowed, say, for a computer, right? Let's say if money is borrowed for a fire truck with a 10-year life, you can't apply it to a computer with a 3-year life. So there has to be equity in how the money is used.
That part I understand in number one. And number two, I understand
the second, the question about the building is the building cannot go into operating funds. It can only go into assets. It has to be used for assets.
So next year we'll see that as a deduction on your budget?
It'll be somehow applied against capital assets. That's
okay.
right.
Okay.
That's the law.
Okay. I'll remain discontented. This year I noticed a lot of trucks. What is the formula? Is this formula based, or the trucks are in desperate need? I know we run them hard. Is there a formula for that?
Are you referring to DBW trucks?
DBW trucks, yes.
I think
they're in they're in all sections of this.
Mr. Rodemaker could go through that in detail, but there's a schedule based on the age, the mileage, and the condition.
Okay.
And the type of truck. Some trucks last longer than others.
Right, because we run them pretty hard in the winter.
All year long.
Oh, yeah, okay. Perhaps sometime in the future we could have an inventory in the future.
Well, the capital planning committee does review the inventory.
Okay, perhaps you could add that as an addendum.
It's 10 pages.
Well, it's electronic. You can give it to us electronically. Thank you. We're voting for voting machines. Perhaps we could have very quickly some clarification, because I got one more. They seem to work fine when I go to Precinct 12. Does anyone want to speak to why we're adding new voting machines?
Your voting machine?
I can strike it.
They're buying new ones.
Okay, someone else can speak to that. My last issue is we authorized $1.2 million for planning on the DPW building, and I'm all in favor of that building. I just thought we would have more information about the building. It's like building a new elementary school, and we have just the drawing that we had in December. So I'm totally behind that. I just literally wish that someone would get up and tell us more about the building. In particular, I'm all in favor of the road connecting from the back of the high school through the 2 parking lots that are going to exist there, so that, especially in the evening, when people come to the high school, those parking lots can be readily accessed and used, plus also the public safety aspect. So I do hope that we'll hear more under this budget about the DPW building. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Whoops. I don't want to do that. Mr. Dennis?
Greg Dennis, Precinct 1. I came up to talk about voting machines. So I'm very happy that we are purchasing new voting machines because our current ones are frankly pretty old. And we know about the risks of relying on old and outdated voting technology. We were warned about them, and by we I mean the country and the state generally, in 2014 by the Presidential Commission on Election Administration, in 2015 by a report by the Brennan Center for Justice that called out Massachusetts specifically in being behind in updated voting technology. The risks are, number one, that old machines are more likely to suffer from security vulnerabilities. And number two, they're more likely to simply break down and be hard to repair when they do. So, for example, our current model of voting machine, which is called the AccuVote, its internal operating system is Windows XP, which Microsoft doesn't support anymore and hasn't seen a security update for several years. The machines are no longer manufactured, so if they have a mechanical or hardware failure, the vendor essentially has to salvage parts from junked machines to stitch the machines back together again. So while it's a rather small expenditure in the budget compared to some of the larger things we're looking at, I'm very happy it's there. I do have some questions about them. But I saw that Mr. Jameson didn't have anybody up to answer his questions, but I'll say them anyway. Number one, I understand the Secretary of State's office was interested in providing at least some sort of reimbursement or negotiated rate to incentivize municipalities to upgrade. And I'm wondering whether we've taken advantage of that and if that reduced cost is reflected in the item we see in the report.
I'm not sure who can answer that question. Mr. Foskett?
We were not informed of any program to that effect.
Okay. I guess we'll confer offline. And I'm also interested to know if they'll be ready and programmed in time for the 2020 election. I'm hearing yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dan Dunn, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member from Precinct 21, 58 Alpine Street. Mr. Moderator, first, just clarification. What questions are before us?
The main vote and Mr. Varoglu's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Nothing. The other two amendments weren't in order, and no one seconded the motion to postpone.
Thank you for the clarification. I stood up to speak against Mr. Varoglu's amendment because I want to talk about the Lake Street intersection and why that project is important. I think there's two things to think about. One is, do we actually need the work there? And the second thing is, given that if you agree that we've got a problem there, do you agree that we've got the right solution for it? In terms of whether or not we've got a problem there, just some of the numbers from between the 2 years of 2014 and 2015, which is the most recent data I've got handy, there are 14 crashes, 5 of them were injury, several of them involving pedestrians and other near misses. High volumes of 1,300 vehicles per hour and 253 bikeways per hour in the morning, 1,300 and 316 bikeway users in the afternoon hours. It's a highly contested piece of real estate there, and it's a safety hazard, and it's also causing backups on Lake Street well down the road that just, frankly, aren't necessary. So that's my argument, that there is a problem at that intersection that needs to be fixed. Then the question is whether or not we've got the right fix there. I'm a bicycle commuter, call it 2 days out of 5 if I'm being good. And I can tell you that as a bicyclist, when you wheel up to that intersection, you can come to a complete stop at that stop sign, and what you'll see is maybe one car will go through, but most of the time, all the other cars will come to a halt. And at that point, you're in a staring contest until you cross. And other times you'll see just people, obviously you do see bicyclists who will go through without honoring the stop sign, and you'll see cars that'll go through. There's all sorts of good and bad behaviors there that are contributing, but the root of it is that it's a highly contested piece of real estate. And so we sent this to TAC. TAC did several studies on it. They came back with a proposed solution to the Select Board. The Select Board listened to some of the opponents and some of the proponents and asked TAC to go back and do another study. And so the town invested money, and actually they kind of reenacted what would happen if there was a signal there by using police officers. And it did exactly what you'd think it would do, which increased the safety, and it also increased the flow of cars because it made them metered as opposed to just continuous. And then after it came back to the Select Board, I think it was a third time, we approved the plan going forward. So I really believe that this is a project that is needed in town, and I believe that it's a very carefully thought out program. It's been carried to the point of what you call 75% plans, and we need money to carry it through to fruition. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Foskett?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I basically would like to ask Mr. Rodemaker to speak, yield my time to him, because I think there have been some serious questions raised about the DPW project. And I think that Mr. Rodemaker has some insights based on the work that he has done with Weston and Sampson and how we can move forward on this project successfully.
Fine, Mr. Rodemaker, you have 6 minutes and 30 seconds.
Sure. Thank you, Michael Rademacher, Public Works. It is true that the Millbrook does pose a significant challenge for us in Public Works. It does maybe once every 3 years come above its banks, and the garage where we perform the majority of our operations is impacted. We have had 1, sometimes 2 feet of water in that garage, and that is why what we're designing is to take our critical operations and move them to high ground, where we now have our vehicles parked. The garage down below would be, potentially the floor would be raised a bit and would just be turned into vehicle storage, which would not be as critical and not be as impacted by such a flood. As far as our project being able to solve the flooding of Millbrook, it is unfortunately not a reality. The issue of Millbrook is a town-wide problem from one end of town to the other. We unfortunately have overdeveloped or very, very highly developed the town of Arlington with a lot of pavement, and that pavement causes rainwater that wants to get to the Millbrook. And if I were to just make the culvert larger in Public Works, I would be then putting the problem downstream, and regulatorily, I'm not allowed to do that. We would have to increase the size of Millbrook through the high school, through Mill Street, Millbrook Place, so forth and so on, through the cemetery to the Mystic Lakes, and then prove that we are not making a problem at the Mystic Lakes. So I feel like my project, or the Public Works project, and the high school project, it does its due diligence in designing a facility that will not be impacted if and when flooding does occur. So we want to protect our buildings because it's near impossible to prevent a flood. And I just wanted to let town meeting know that this is something that myself and our designers are taking to heart and seriously in designing our project.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McNeil?
Adam McNeil, Precinct 4. I'm also a member of the Bicycle Advisory Committee. So Vice Chair Dunn stole a lot of my thunder, but I wanted to, even more than he said, how impressed upon how important the Lake Street light is, just because someone is eventually going to die there if we don't change it. And we've had, as Dunn mentioned, a lot of injuries and close calls, and it's a miracle that no one has died yet. The town spent 2 years going to the state to try and get funding for this with some a little more expensive proposals. We've got a leaner one here, and I think it's incredibly important that we push through and approve this and vote down Mr. Varoglu's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hayner?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bill Hayner, Precinct 2. I live in Kelwyn Manor, and I'm here to support the traffic light that has just been talked about. My biggest concern is enforcement. Several times, just this past week, I've had bikers, and they are a minority. I mean that sincerely, but they are extremely dangerous. And if we put a traffic light, we take a time to put it in there, we sync it so that the traffic flows regularly, we need to feel comfortable as a car driver that people are going to stop at that stop sign on the bike path. I almost hit somebody. I yelled at him, and he flipped me the bird. And that's his First Amendment right to do that, but if I had hit him, I would have been at fault, even though he was the cause of it. People, I mean, I guess what I'm asking for, we're going to spend the money for this light. I think it's necessary. I think it will impact a better flow of traffic on that street. At 2:30 this afternoon, traffic was backed up on Lake Street all the way back to Route 2 from that intersection. Okay, but we need hopefully law enforcement there, and I think after about a couple of weeks with some hype, those people are under the same traffic laws as I am driving a vehicle. They don't stop at a stop sign. They should get nailed the same way if I don't stop at a stop sign or a traffic light. And I think we need to have that enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman?
Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. And there's been some discussion about whether the override will affect the capital budget or just the general budget. So I'd like, from reading Appendix D, it appears that it won't affect the capital budget. Is that correct?
Mr. Foskett?
So in Appendix C, there are some incremental expenditures in the operating budget that come from the override. Basically, the whole capital budgeting process is to say that we will spend year after year and time after time no more than 5% of the non-exempt budget on capital improvements. So we put a plan together so that the number stays at that amount. And I take issue with Mr. Levy's earlier discussion that the capital budget is going to suck up the override. That's not the case. The capital budget will continue to use only 5% of the total budget, whatever it is. So the raw fact is that eventually, it may not be this year, but if it's not this year, it'll be next year or the year after. Eventually, there has to be an override or there has to be a cut in services. And those services that'll get cut will be both operating budget services and capital expenditure services. So I don't think you can say that the override is only for the operating budget or only for the capital budget. It's for the total budget.
So I hope I'm not out of scope, but the other question I really want to know is if the override passes, how much will it add to our taxes?
Well, that's way out of scope, but Adam's going to tell us.
I know people want to know that.
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. For the average single-family home value, which is approximately $752,000, it would be an incremental increase of $370.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher?
Andrew Fisher, Precinct 6. Mr. Moderator, can you ask somebody, Mr. Rademacher, or someone to explain? I'd like to be clear on how much playing fields we're losing to the parking for Public Works.
Do you understand the question, Mr. Rademacher? Or Adam, Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. If you look at the DPW site and the high school site collectively, we're actually gaining one practice/playing field because of what's been designed on the high school property. So what's currently the practice field, that's behind the Stop and Shop, will be dedicated half to parking for DPW, half to parking for the high school. But we're able to program now behind the high school a varsity baseball field, varsity softball field, and 2 varsity-sized rectangular sport fields for lacrosse, soccer, field hockey. So we're actually net gaining one practice/playing field.
Okay. Tell me if I'm out of scope, but this is just a curiosity question. When Stop and Shop wanted to use that land for a swimming pool, famously the town's high school was 11 acres, and I just wondered if that was how it got to be 22 acres, if that was a misconception or if it only counted the playing fields or what. Does anyone know that? And thank you.
I don't know. Do you know the total acreage of the high school lot?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. I can't speak to that 11-acre figure. I'm not familiar with that, but the approximate site of the current high school site is about 22 acres.
Okay, thank you. There was a woman over here right next to Mr. Hayner. No, you're Mr. Peluso. There's a woman. The other night, right there to Bill's right, there was a woman raised her hand. Yep. Does she still want to speak? Just say pass. Pass. Mr. Brennis, Alex, am I pronouncing it wrong? Sorry. I'll get you, yeah.
Alex Bilski, Precinct 2. I want to start by thanking the Capital Planning Committee for the great work that they've been doing to improve and add to Arlington's schools and other facilities. And I'm rising in support of the capital budget. I did want to speak to what has been labeled the Lake Street Minuteman Light Project. I live about half a mile from Lake Street and the bike path. It's on my daughter's walk to Hardy School. I'm also the volunteer Safe Routes to School coordinator for Hardy School. And I was fortunate to be appointed by East Arlington Livable Streets to the Lake Street Light Design Committee at the invitation of the town manager. I am speaking for myself and not for East Arlington Livable Streets. I do respect Mr. Varoglu and his advocacy for sustainable transportation, but I do support the capital budget and that appropriation for the work on that intersection. I also want to clarify that project is not just about Lake Street and the bike path, but also about the Brooks Ave and Lake Street intersection, which is quite close to the Minuteman. I have, as many Hardy parents have, noted significant safety concerns at Brooks and Lake. In the morning, during Hardy drop-off, there is frequently gridlock in that intersection. So cars are stopped there in the middle of the intersection as children are trying to cross. And it is frequently beyond the level that our crossing guard or any crossing guard can manage. As Mr. Dunn mentioned, there have been other safety concerns identified at Lake and the Minuteman that have been identified by others and by the TAC. So, you know, the process on that Lake Street Light Design Committee was at times contentious. So the stated goal of that light was to improve safety. And so we spent a lot of time talking about improving safety at the path and at Brooks. And that is the reason for my support for this project, because I do think those safety concerns are real and need to be addressed. But there was a tension because there is also this drive from many commuters who go through there in their cars to get that traffic moving faster. And you know, there's a concern, a valid concern on the part of many that speeding up those cars is not going to improve safety, that it's going to have the opposite effect. And at times when questions about that were raised on that committee, there was a lot of resistance to those kinds of questions. So, sometimes we plan improvements, things don't work out as they're planned. You know, we had the Hawk signal put up at Swan Place. After it was in place for a while, it was recognized that we needed to go in a different direction. So, you know, I do support the light, the two lights, one at Lake, one at Brooks. There's going to be coordination between the lights. There's going to be improvements to the path there. There's a lot more, and some of you may have attended the hearing about this, all the elements of the design. So I am in support, but my question, Mr. Moderator, is will the town study the intersection after the construction is done to determine that safety has been improved, and if additional action needs to be taken, will the town be able to take that action? Thank you.
Mr. Chapdelaine, can you address that?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. I think that's a good question, and as you referenced with the Swan Place intersection, we would stand very willing to do a reassessment, listen to community concerns if they came up after it was implemented, and if adjustments were necessary, we would certainly take them.
Thank you. Mr. Rierig? Mr. McCabe? Mr. McCabe has the floor.
Mark McCabe, Precinct 2. I stand to terminate debate on Article 58 and all matters before it.
We have a motion to terminate debate. No, you're all set. I don't know why they're yelling. Thank you, Mr. McCabe. We have a motion to terminate debate on Article 58 and all matters before it. All in favor of termination debate, please say yes. Yes. All opposed? No. In my opinion, it is a two-thirds vote. Well, 5 of you have to arise. All right, we'll do a clicker vote. All in favor of terminating debate, please press 1. Go ahead, press 1 to terminate debate, 2 to continue debating. Actually, it's not two-thirds, right? 50, no, 107. Yeah, that's a two-thirds vote. 100, yeah. My math worked. Debate is terminated. We now have before us, first we're going to vote on Mr. Varoglu's motion, and then we'll vote on the main motion. So when we're ready, Mr. Varoglu's motion under Budget 5, line item 7, he wants to take out line item 7, which is $750,000 for the Lake Street Bikeway intersection. He wants to delete that and use the money to study drainage problems on the bikeway. So he wants to delete the $750,000 for the Lake Street Bikeway. Yes, sir. Correct. I said that. And the remaining funds be used to improve drainage, and it may be considered improving the Lake Street Bikeway intersection. It's all up there. Are you clear on his motion? All right. Budget 5, line... Oh, it's gone. Budget 5, line item 7. He's deleting the number $750,000 that's for the Lake Street Bikeway intersection improvements. He wants to redirect that $750,000 will be redirected to improve the drainage of the Minuteman Bikeway west of Lake Street and to the east of Spy Pond, such that the flooding and freezing of standing water be greatly reduced or eliminated on the bikeway. Any funds remaining after improving drainage may be considered for improving the Lake Street Bikeway intersection. Is that clear? Okay. So first we're going to vote on Mr. Varoglu's motion. If you're in favor of Mr. Varoglu's amendment, please press 1 for yes. If you are not in favor of it, please press 2 for no. 1 to amend, 2 to reject the amendment. $198 in the negative, 2 in the positive. The amendment is defeated. $189 in the negative, 20 in the positive. It's defeated. We now have the recommended vote of the Finance of the Capital Planning Committee as printed in their report. Yes, sir. I was going to take one. Oh, do you want to vote each one separately? Okay. So we're going to vote each one of their budgets one. No, some has to be 2/3. Okay, well, we can try it that way. We'll take one vote. If it doesn't reach two-thirds, we're going to then split the vote and take separate votes on each one of them. So if you're in favor of the whole entire recommended vote, press 1 for yes, 2 for no, and we'll hope we make two-thirds. Yeah, red solo cup. $198 in the positive, 14 in the negative. It is two-thirds vote, and I so declare it. That, yes, sir. That closes Article 58. Yes, sir. Then I want to make a comment. Yeah.
Charles Foskett, Precinct 8, and Chairman of the Capital Planning Committee. Mr. Rodemaker and the Capital Planning Committee are going to take a serious look at the flooding on the bike path.
Thank you. Mr. Tosti?
In a continuing effort to try to get the large items before you so they don't go at the end, the next project that we want to take is the CPA budget, the Community Preservation Act Committee. So I move that we table Articles 59 through 67, which will then bring up 68, which is the Community Preservation Act.
All in favor of tabling Articles 59 through 67, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? Those articles are tabled. That brings us to Article 58. Now, before we start, I want to make one comment. These motions that we got, we have to abide by our 48-hour rule for the fairness of everybody. And even, Mr. Not calling out anybody's drafting, but Mr. Heim and myself are both available 40 hours a week to help you draft motions. We like to see them in advance so that we can clean them up and make sure that they fit within the bylaws where they're supposed to fit, that they're clear and concise, and it doesn't really purport well for either of us to get these things in the last minute when they're going to print, because we can't comment on it and even comment on how they can be more clearly presented to the members. Please utilize our services and don't take it all upon yourself totally. We're not going to change your article and your amendments. We're going to help you make them better for the meeting as a whole. Okay, Mr. Eric, did you want to present? Okay, Mr. Helmuth.
Thank you, Eric Helmuth, Precinct 12 and Chair of the CPA Committee. Before we present our article, we have a small administrative change to make to the vote, Mr. Moderator. So on page 14 of your CPA reports, item H under the second vote, second group of votes, item H, which is appropriate the sum of $500,000 for the Winslow Towers envelope repair project. And the next word's for the maintenance of community housing, and it should say for the preservation of community housing. So we need to strike the word maintenance and substitute the word preservation. And that is to be more clear about our compliance with the state CPA law about what you can use CPA funds for.
So can you state that again?
Yes. And so on page 14 of the printed CPA report, there's a list of votes, items B through H on that page. And the last item in bold, item H, which is an appropriation for $500,000 for the Winslow Towers envelope repair project. And it says for the maintenance of community housing, and we need to change the word maintenance to the word preservation so that it reads for the preservation of community housing.
Okay, we can make that change administratively.
Thank you. You have my...
Thank you.
That's good. Great. Now, go ahead, my first slide, please. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So before I get into the recommended projects, I want to just quickly draw your attention to the votes in your report. These are explained in detail in the report, But first we have some housekeeping votes that just move some money around into accounts that just give us a clear paper trail to ensure that we're compliant with the 10% reservation requirements of CPA receipts for the next year for each of the 3 major areas. If anything goes wrong with the projects, that money rolls back to these accounts and we're retroactively compliant. The second group of votes are what we're going to talk about tonight, the 8 recommended CPA projects that we hope that you will support. And the final vote appropriates a little bit of money to the administrative expenses account where, so that we can support the operation of the committee. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk to you tonight about the 8 projects, and I think the one that they're all exciting, and one I'm particularly excited about is the Whittemore Park Revitalization Plan. CPA funded a study with over 600 residents participating over several months in several modes of community input. And the development of that was a beautiful conceptual, detailed conceptual plan for how we can reimagine this shared civic space. Whittemore Park is, as you can see in this photo, is right in front of the Sarah Stalin Museum and right there in the middle of town. And there is no real lawn there right now. And the plan envisions, among other things, the creation of a lawn. Next slide, please. So this is a map, and you can orient yourself. Mass Ave is on the left. And now if you go to the next slide, the conceptual plan was for a 3-phase project, and the town has decided to approach this over 3 years, the first year and the first phase being done with CPA funds, if you so approve. So this is the area we're talking about, and in addition to creating a lawn to make that possible, the walkways that are there now, the brick walkways, would be taken out, and there'd be the creation of a circular path. Next slide, please. You can see a little bit, one view of that there. And the next slide after that. And the path would continue. The tracks would remain and be enhanced and actually be more accessible. The genesis and the goal for this is to draw more people into the park, to get rid of the fence. There are 4 trees that have to come out anyway. The tree warden has said that they just need to go because they're dead or unhealthy. That will open up some sunlight. It'll still have a tree canopy, but it will allow a healthy lawn to thrive. And the goal is for this to have more uses by more people. It's a place where people want to hang out and enjoy their town green, which is what the space was intended to be, as well as to provide a more flexible space for special events and for civic events that this space is sometimes used for now. I think the town sees that there's opportunities for that later. There's been some talk about trees, and I think that we're all very concerned about that. I've been assured by the town manager that there are no plans to remove trees for this project beyond those that the tree warden has already designated for removal that need to go anyway for other reasons. If you look at the conceptual plan online, and I hope that you do, they've also told me that the town is not pursuing a variant design that would actually do more paving and more tree removal. So that's something to know as well. Happy to answer more detailed questions about that as we go along, but let's move on to the next project, to the next slide. And that is 2 markers in town that are in terrible shape, and we discovered that there are almost 300 of these across Massachusetts, and they are themselves historical artifacts. Other towns have used CPA funds to restore them. I know it's funny, but they're a snapshot of how people were thinking about what was important in the 1930s. When restored, they are beautifully painted with blue and white and black, and one's at the Jason Russell House, one's outside of Water Street, and that's something that we can do for a very low cost. Next slide, please. The old burying ground is adjacent to the library and a lot of other things. Portions of the stone wall are crumbling and compromising some of the tombs that are there, and so this would address the most crucial parts of that structural work that we need to do. Next slide. The Whittemore Robbins cottage is the one on the left. The one on the right was one of our first CPA projects, and that's next door to it on the right if you're facing them, and that's the carriage house. So this is another house on the estate. It is not usable now, but the town would like to use it for youth counseling center services and other functions of the town. Some of those are revenue positive or revenue neutral. So this would get that process started and work on the exterior. Next slide, please. CPA has also funded a master plan for the reservoir rehabilitation and phase 1, which is about to become in progress. And we're asking for you to approve another $500,000 to start funding the development of plans and readiness for phase 2. Those details, again, are in your report, or we have people here who can answer your questions. Next slide. The North Union Playground is across from Thompson School, one of the most heavily used playgrounds in town, and in deplorable condition. The equipment is past its end of life. And the reason the amount of this is low, and I started, is that this is being supplemented by $200,000 in CDBG funds. So that helps stretch the CPA dollars further and will do wonderful things for this neighborhood. Next slide. The Spy Pond bleachers are a resource in town and also kind of a puzzle as to what to do with them, whether to spend the money to, how we would spend the money to rehabilitate them, what we would do with them. So the Public Works has asked for funds to conduct a really good community process and study for what the community wants and what the options are. We actually asked them to increase the number of public meetings from 2 to 3 to ensure wide community participation, because we think people will have a lot to say about this resource in the coming year. So this is a study. And the next slide. And finally, we would like to continue our commitment to preserving community housing by contributing $500,000 to fix water infiltration leaks for the senior housing at Winslow Towers. Thank you very much, and we are here to answer your questions about the projects or about CPA. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Milovchik? Where'd she go? Beth? I got you, Susan. Yeah. John, who?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Beth Milovchik. I'm in Precinct 9, and I am a new town meeting member. I hope you'll be gentle with me. I have some slides. So I am here to speak about the tree canopy, the design, which I think does not reflect in the best possible way Arlington, a New England town with this iconic revolutionary namesake. The original plan actually involved moving this monument and the railroad tracks, two of, I think, the two most important things in the park. And I stand here before you because once the wood chipper begins and the concrete is poured, it will be too late for the tree canopy. Can we go to the next slide, please? So my concern is, and I apologize, it's early, so the colossal trees are not in bloom, but as you can see, the canopy really dominates that square and towers over the house. My fear and my concern, and I think a loss that we cannot tolerate, and I ask you to not consider, is the loss of this canopy from that square, and then the most noteworthy thing at that square, which will be the modern Winslow Tower, where now it's the canopy, it's the green space, it's this park for Samuel Whittemore. So I take pause that Arlington selectmen and the ARB continue in their push to urbanize Arlington. I've been busy trying to defeat that. Whittemore Park's towering tree canopy at this intersection of Mystic Street and Mass Ave is headed for the chipper. Plans include, although we're told now only 4 more additional ones, 9 trees, when the gentle shade of Whittemore Park is a memory and the sun-baked park mirrors the barren one across the street at Uncle Sam Plaza. Thank the selectmen or the ARB. I'm confused as to who owns the park. In 2018, Kevin Greeley at a select board hearing stated that the park was deeded to the select board. This was in the hearing for the beer garden. But I noticed in the application that the ARB owns it, so that's a little confusing to me. My concerns continue. The final plan, and they have a nice glossy, expensive booklet. The final plan does not reference Lexington Green or Concord's Green, and that's why I think it's not appropriate for this particular park whose namesake is Samuel Whittemore. Samuel Whittemore, the coolest geezer dude in our revolutionary history, at 78 years old, the man wouldn't die. And I think this is to be celebrated. He had grit and fortitude, which is what built this country. And I think, so we would like to have a park that referenced in its planning and its conceptual design the other two revolutionary towns, Concord and Lexington. And we often hear the lament, why does no one know about Arlington's role in the revolutionary history? Perhaps it's because we pave over things like Russell Green. So we're in a New England town where now we're trying to recreate a green that got paved over and most of the trees taken out. I'm trying to prevent that from happening. And yes, I'm a tree hugger. So, since I'm a tree hugger, and I hope, can we have the next slide, please? And the next one. So, I think any town project with a potential removal of trees needs to evaluate, so any town project should have at its core climate resiliency. We've got climate change. We've seen what happens. So my idea is that any town project has at its core climate resiliency. What does this mean? If we're going to be removing trees, we should know what they are doing for us now. They are a resource. They are our natural resource. And frankly, they're worth thousands of dollars. Can anyone tell me how much the one that we lost at Uncle Sam Plaza was worth, that heritage tree? Nobody was looking out for it. It's gone. Now that Uncle Sam Plaza is a sun-baked plaza, which when we have Porch Fest, they have to put a tent up. Uncle Whittemore Park is much more appealing because we do have the tree canopy. So, has the environmental impact been weighed? Loss of tree canopy, loss of carbon and heat sequestration, maximization of stormwater runoff. These giants absorb a lot of stormwater. So let's take a time out. Let's figure out what Whittemore's patch of green should be and is in front of a historic house honoring a Revolutionary War hero. Give us a year, figure out how we can maximize the historic revolutionary component for tourism. Concord has it, Lexington has it. We seem to be missing out on a part of it. My other questions are, was there a, oh, sorry. I did measure the trees today, and they range from a circumference of 6 feet to 10 feet 10 inches. The diameter at breast height ranging from 1.9 feet to 3.5 feet. Again, these are behemoths. I'm speaking of the Atlantis trees. I'm not sure now with the modifications to the plan which ones they plan on taking down, so that would be nice to know. Who owns the property? I think $1.5 million is a lot of money to regrade the lawn and move the pathways and put in steps facing the nail salon. Not quite sure what that's about. In the application that I viewed online, I have 2 bureaucratic questions. Who owns the property? And then item number 2 on page 10, the deed restrictions. There wasn't a copy of that filed yet, so does it exist? And then what are the specific deed restrictions, since this is on the National Registry of Historic Places? So do we have another slide? So the park was well used during the beer garden. People like it. It's nice to be beneath trees. So I ask you to please not cut the trees down. I ask you to approve my amendment and give us a year. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a second on the amendment? Okay. So there were a couple questions. Do we know who actually owns the park? The selectmen or the ARB? Mr. Heim?
Doug Heim, Town Council. So when we're talking about Whittemore Park, we're actually talking about a couple of parcels together. The majority of what we're talking about typically is the select board, but there might be portions of it that are part of an ARB parcel. But what we're talking about for most of the project is the select board. The other thing that's relevant is the reason that the select board is the entity that one would come to for something like the beer garden is because they provide alcohol licenses and things like that. So the property's the town's. The ARB may have some contiguous sort of parts of it, but the main body of it is in the select board's name. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rowe?
Clarissa Rowe, Precinct 4. I am rising in opposition to this amendment, and I urge you to vote the amendment down and vote yes for the CPA projects. I'm going to go into my credentials as a tree hugger. I'm about as old as Uncle Sam now, and I've been watching the trees in Arlington for decades. This space in town was designed a while ago, and badly, in my opinion. I'm a landscape architect. It was designed by a firm that I used to be part of. It does not work well. It is supposed to be our common, our green space. We are not Concord. We are not Lexington. We're Arlington. But for a long time, the space has been foreboding. You don't see that many people in it. What has happened lately is the wonderful Cyrus Dallin Museum has been drawing people in there. We also have Porch Fest and the Beer Garden and Cheerful. So the programs are bringing people in. But this place should be, and I think this new design is outstanding. It's a beautiful design, and you can tell as a landscape architect who doesn't like one design a landscape architect does, but likes this new one, that I really care about design. I care about people using spaces. Okay, now you have to hear about what I do in my day job. I'm a registered landscape architect. I plant hundreds of trees a year. One year, I planted 2,500 trees on an island in the middle of the Boston Harbor. I love trees. Sometimes, though, trees have to be taken down. Arlington, in its infinite wisdom, had a Norway maple nursery. That's why we have more Norway maples than probably any other municipality in Massachusetts. People can't buy those trees anymore. They still provide a lot of our canopy, but slowly over time, we are replacing them. The ones in Whittemore Park need to go. One of them was already dead and taken down, and the other 4 should go. This is a really exciting plan. More importantly, we have, as you've heard from the tree committee, a bunch of volunteers who are watching our tree budgets. I think we have $65,000 for trees this year. We haven't had that since I first moved to Arlington a very long time ago. This is wonderful news. They have done a wonderful job. Now, that might be because the chair of the select board and I decided to put in a tree committee. And that kind of citizen participation means that old grizzled people like me, almost as old as Uncle Sam, don't have to be the only eyes. The tree canopy in Arlington is now a resource. Trees are a renewable resource. So I ask you, please, please, vote no on the amendment and yes on this wonderful park design. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlickman.
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9. I live on Mystic Street, about a block and a half from this park. I drive past it or walk past it several times a day. It is an underused resource of the town. It has been in the 20-some-odd years I've lived here. The fencing in front of it makes it difficult to access. The design of it makes it not particularly inviting unless you also put in a beer tap. It should be our greatest public space. It should be open and accessible. This is a design to take some parkland in the center of town, in the most prominent place in town, passed by lots of people on bicycles, lots of people on foot, and making it an attractive place to stop even when the beer garden isn't running. Now, the issue of the trees is one of concern, but if you listen carefully to what the report said, we have sick trees, and those sick trees will be removed whether we do the park or not. So that voting down the park does not save the trees. Voting down the park votes down a park, which will be a significant civic improvement for my neighborhood, for our town, and all our friends who come and visit us and will come through town and have another nice place to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tremblay?
Ed Tremblay, Precinct 19. I've got a couple of questions about this. I've heard different figures thrown around. The CPA budget was $529,000 or something, I don't remember exactly. But I've also heard a figure of $1.5 million thrown around. How is the extra $1 million? Does that mean, is there another $1 million in this park? And where's that money coming from?
Mr. Helmuth?
Thank you, Eric Helmuth, CPA Committee Chair. So this appropriation is just for phase one of the three-phase plan, so that's what's before us now. So that, I think that's the reason for the discrepancy.
Okay, what about what is it, phase 2 and phase 3?
Phase 2. I'd have to defer to town officials. I think Ms. Raitt may know the answer to that.
Yep, that's right.
Jennifer Raitt, Director of Planning and Community Development. So phase 2, we're proposing to expend community development block grant funds for in a future CDBG year. And phase 3, we would put into a future year of the capital budget. So phase 2 is actually for the, you saw in an initial slide by Mr. Helmuth, the front portion in front of the Dallin Museum is what you're talking about right now. The portion around the house, the Dallin Museum, is for part of phase 2, and then phase 3 would be behind the house, including what is currently basically a driveway.
Okay, you mean that driveway that services all the apartments and the businesses there? But I'm sorry, that's a different budget year, so I shouldn't even bring that up. So I'm curious, Mr. Moderator, how much it would cost to have the tree department go down and cut down the trees that need to go?
Mr. Rodemaker, can you give us a good guesstimate?
Mike Rademacher, Director of Public Works. I'm sorry, the question is, what would it cost to cut the 4 trees down?
Yeah, I mean, how much would it cost the town to cut down the trees?
Save between $5,000 and $8,000.
$5,000 and $8,000. Okay, and Mr. Moderator, I have another question. We've heard that the park is inaccessible because of the fence. So how much would it cost to send a couple of guys down with one of those new 1-ton dump trucks we just bought and take all the railings out of the granite posts?
Mr. Rodemaker?
I couldn't tell you exactly. It would probably be a week's worth of labor, probably, to cut them out. I mean, they're cemented into granite piers. It's not an easy demolition.
Well, actually, I don't know if I should be admitting this before town meeting, but I used to plow the sidewalk there, and I bumped one of those posts, one of those pipes with a truck, and it fell out. So I think they maybe aren't that hard to get them out. And by the way, somebody put it back in again in a day. So I don't think it's that hard to take out. So, so we're about to spend $300 million on a high school, $44 million in the capital budget for needed DPW yard, additions to the library, a new Fox library, and here we are spending like $1.5 million ultimately on a park that we could make accessible and get the dangerous trees out of there for, I don't know, $10,000, $15,000. That doesn't seem like a good use of money to me. And I'm sure that there are parks around that need attention, and maybe, I know you're not supposed to do this, but we're using CPA funds to fix up a park. I bet there's other parks around that are in the town budget that we could use CPA funds for, and maybe CBDG funds for. I bet there's there's no shortage of projects to use these different funds for. And maybe if we just didn't spend $1.5 million, which is like 25% of the override that we want to pass, maybe if we didn't spend that, we wouldn't have to have an override. And to tell you the truth, I think if I had my red pen, I bet I could find a little more money to not need an override sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This woman in the back right in the green sweater. I have you, Mr. Warden. Yep.
Naomi Greenfield, Precinct 15. This is not about the amendment or about finding extra money places or the Whittemore Robbins Park, but I do want to speak about two things in the budget, specifically the projected projects for next year. I want to speak just briefly about the Arlington Reservoir. I don't know how many people have been to the Arlington Reservoir or season pass holders, but I just want to show my support for whatever we're going to do to make that a safer and cleaner place to swim. I know I purchased a season pass last year, and I happened to go swimming the day before that the reservoir was closed because of high bacteria levels, and I was sick for a week. And I also had to cancel my son's birthday party that was planned for the res because it was closed there. So I think that's a great service to have in our town, and we should definitely be spending money to make sure that's a safe, fun place to be. The second one was, I just had a question for Mr. Helmuth. I noticed that the Spy Pond Park playground was not in recommended projects, and I was just wondering if that was ever going to be in projected projects for the year. I know I used to live right on Pleasant Street, and that was our go-to playground, and there are a number of pieces of equipment in that park that have been broken and removed for a number of years, and it's one of the more beautiful views that we have for our playground, so I was just wondering if that was going to be in the list of projects.
Mr. Helmuth?
Eric Helmuth, Precinct 12. That is not in the CPA, well, we don't know what will be presented for us next year, but I was just informed that it is in the capital plan for the next fiscal year.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's 9:30. Let's take our 7-minute break. The girls are out there selling cookies.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bill Berkowitz, Precinct 8. My question is about the...
Yes, sir. Yes. That's actually a point of personal privilege.
My question is about...
Yeah. Bill, speak right into the microphone, please.
Trying.
Okay,
My question is about the old burying ground. And in reports I read in the Advocate going back about a year or so ago, I did read that there were plans to remove from the old burying ground several dozen trees. I wonder whether this is accurate. Are there plans to remove trees from the old burying ground? If so, how many? And I could not find the report of the plan for the old burying ground on at least the Cemetery Commission website on the Arlington MA Gov site. So And also interested in where one might find the details in terms of what's planned for the old burying ground. And of course, our discussion about the possible tree cutting at the old burying ground relates to the discussion about trees that we've had prior to the break. Thank you.
I think this gentleman here is going to answer the question.
Jim Feeney, Town Manager's Office. So first and foremost, the Old Burying Ground Preservation Master Plan can be found on the CPA webpage.
CPA webpage?
Yeah.
Thank you.
My apologies. Yes, there are trees slated for removal to allow for access to the tombs and the stone walls. So in total, there are 57 trees in the old burying ground. There were 19 that were located dotting the perimeter of the site, many of which are smaller scrub or invasive trees, and some of which are already dead or dying. So as it stands, we'd be looking at removing anywhere between 15 and 17 trees, depending on when a contractor comes on board, their opinion on whether or not access would be needed to get closer to the wall.
I would simply comment that I live nearby. I do pass through the old burying ground frequently on my way to, for example, the library, and actually sometimes to Town Hall. I do find that a very attractive and peaceful space in town. I can't comment on the health of the trees that are in the old burying ground, but I am wanting to be very careful about changing the overall look and peaceful atmosphere of the old burying ground. And if this goes forward, I would certainly hope that the general look of the old burying ground would not change. That's what I have to say on that. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Ms. Berkowitz. Is Mr. Levy right there? Did you have your hand up? Nope. You just raised your hand. You're in the end of the list. No, Mr. Levy, you're up.
Dave Levy, Precinct 18. Just a few questions. One, what would the plans be for the beer garden for the foreseeable summers?
So for the summers during in Mr. Chapter Lane, while it's under construction, is that the basic question? Yeah.
Adam, Chapter Lane Town Manager. So it wouldn't be impacted this summer because we'd be going through a design process. And should construction be occurring during the summer season, which I don't know that we've determined yet, we'd have to look at an alternative site for the beer garden if we wanted to continue it for that summer.
Okay, so you'd be committed to putting the beer garden somewhere else? I mean, yeah, drink. I just want to get you on record, Adam.
Well, I can't speak for the select board, but I would be in favor of working with the planning department and the select board and finding an alternative location.
How much does the town make from the beer garden concession a summer?
So last year, in the pilot year, we charged a $400 license fee. This year, we issued an RFP for other breweries to be able to submit a potential proposal. Aeronaut Brewery was the only one who submitted, and they proposed a $1,500 seasonal fee for the beer garden.
Okay. And then one more question, just on the pond that was just a CPA project from the years past that was just kind of constructed. Do we now charge for weddings and other events for the summer? Yeah, that one right there.
Jim Feeney, Town Manager's Office. So we've always charged for rental of this space for weddings, and the garden was sort of a pertinent use to that. But we're also going to be instituting a garden-specific surcharge for events that seek exclusive use of the grounds between Town Hall and the library.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Leonard, Precinct 17. Just a point of clarification, if I could. On page 2 of the report, probably all the way down at the bottom, third line from the bottom talks about annual distributions from the Massachusetts Community Preservation Trust Fund. Now, this might be nitpicking, but if you go to page 10, it talks about annual matching grant distributions from the state CPA Trust Fund. Is this the same animal?
Mr. Helmuth?
Eric Helmuth, CPA Chair. Yes.
Okay, second question. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about trees, and I noticed like up around the Stop and Shop area, a lot of the trees have been cut down. Somewhere in my travels, I remember reading something about the gas company and National Grid responsible for some of the trees being decayed. Who makes the determination that the trees are naturally decayed or possibly caused by gas leaks and they have to come down? And second part of that question is, if it is determined that gas leaks have taken their toll on the trees, does National Grid come across with a couple of bucks to cover the cost?
Yeah, it's way out of scope.
Way out of scope?
Yeah. That's. Why don't you talk to Mr. Rodemaker about that after the meeting?
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Stamps?
Susan Stamps, Precinct 3, a member of the Tree Committee, although I'm not speaking for the Tree Committee because we didn't take a vote or anything on this, but this is a good plan. I completely agree with Clarissa. It should go forward unamended, so I urge people to vote against Ms. Malofchik's amendment. The Tree Committee is very happy about the process. As I recall, whoever is, I don't know who's been running the project, but they originally wanted to take out, I think, 13 trees. They had Bartlett Tree come in, I guess, and do an inventory, and they wanted to take out 13 trees. And then they brought the tree warden in early in the process, and this was before the select board had actually adopted our requested policy that the tree warden be involved in any project, including trees. So I thought that was really great. And what I recall the tree warden telling us was that 5 of the trees he felt were failing and they should be removed. Apparently one of them has been removed. I think there may be 2 more trees that are going to be coming out, I'm not sure. But according to the plan, they're also going to be planting 9 new trees. So that's a net increase of 2 trees. And something that tree people have explained to me is that when you have huge trees in a small area like that, if you look up, the tree canopy, they're all knit together. And that's preventing the light from coming down. And the trees need the light to grow and to be healthy. And so it's actually not a very healthy environment for the trees as far as I can tell. And the idea of taking a few out to let more light in and to make it a friendlier place, you'll see that the canopies of the remaining trees will spread. And I think it'll be beautiful. And I urge everybody to vote no on the amendment and for the CPA project. Thank you.
Mr. Warden? Thank you, Ms. Stamps.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Worden, Precinct 8. 1984. Why does this article remind me of 1984? I don't mean that time before I was moderator and when Mr. McCabe was moderator, who was mentioned earlier this evening, and when, by the way, we didn't have, you wanted to bring an amendment, you could bring it right now. No 48-hour rule. With all due respect to the present regime. Now, 1984, I'm thinking of as George Orwell's story of a dystopian future in which a communist-type government run by Big Brother controls everything, and perhaps many of you have read it or seen a movie of it or something. And one of the ways in which thoughts were controlled was by distorting the meaning of language. And the most egregious distortion was that war is peace. And so that's what reminds me of this, because this project is under the mantle of historic preservation. But the only original historic thing that is there really is the railroad tracks, which were put up exactly in 1846, not around 1846, a well-documented fact. And because they were completed, it's sort of interesting because the time between when Lexington and Arlington, then West Cambridge, got together to plan a railroad, they met, they got a charter from the legislature, they had the place surveyed, they laid the tracks, they ran the trains inside 2 years. And at the present time, you want to build, they want to run a streetcar through Somerville. They thought about it for 10 years, and they're finally starting to do something. So, but a little bit off the topic, sorry. But I'm a fan of railroads. I've written about the subject. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is that call this historic preservation is really a distortion of words. Preservation means deforestation, apparently. The original plan, as was mentioned, was to get rid of the tracks, get rid of the trees, do all this stuff. And they didn't listen to people from Arlington who said, no, you got to keep the tracks. But the Mass Historical Commission came along and said, no, you can't remove the tracks. The present plan keeps most of the tracks. They want to encapsulate the ends for this circular walk, which somehow it's going to be better to go in a circle than to go in a straight line. I don't know about that. And I suppose the Whittemore Monument, and those monuments were put up, I think in the 19th century. We have a few of them marking things that used to be, or buildings that were torn down in the name of progress. But basically, I rise in support of Mr. Milocek's amendment. I think this is a distortion of the term of historic preservation. If you want to call it park planning or something like that, but let's call a spade, and let's not cut down more trees. We seem to lose more trees every year than we gain. And the trees along Mass Avenue here have been cut down. Allegedly, that was the gas company's fault. They say they were dead, but when I waited for the bus in the summer sunshine and had some shade on my head, that dead tree was certainly had a couple leaves on it, at least. Well, anyway, I urge you to support the thing. Let's think this thing through, and let's really, if we have to have these projects, let's call them by honest names. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jameson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to terminate debate on this article and all matters before it. Thank you.
Motion to terminate debate in the article and all matters before it. First, we'll take a voice vote, see if that works. All in favor of terminating debate, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? No. That's a 2/3 vote. Okay, first we have under Article 68, we have Ms. Malofchek's amendment. If you're in favor of Ms. Malofchek's amendment, please press 1 for yes. If you're against it, press 2 for no, soon as we get a proper screen. Oh, wait. Someone's clicker's not working, and Tim's reprogramming it. Can I fix it real quick? Yeah, fix the clicker. It's Mr. Tremblay's. He was playing with it. I know he was. I think it's the heater. I don't know why. Yeah. Yeah. Wow, we like the clickers.
Patty Muldoon, Precinct 20. I'm wondering if it's possible to approve and still encourage that the marker be kept. Is that a possibility?
Are you keeping the Sam Whittemore marker? Okay, I think we're ready for the vote. So go ahead, Ms. Ray.
Jennifer Raitt, Director of Planning and Community Development. Yes, we are planning to keep the marker in the same place.
Okay. Are you ready, Tim? Yeah. Okay, we're all set to take a vote on Ms. Malofchek's amendment. If you're in favor of it, please press 1 for yes, plus 2 if you are not in favor of it. Bless you. And this is the amendment. 1 for... Nope, he's fixing it. Oh, it's amendment 68. There we go. Ms. Malofchek's amendment. Yes for 1, 2 for no. The amendment is defeated 191 in the negative, 20 in the positive. The amendment is defeated 191 in the negative, 20 in the positive. The amendment is defeated. Recommended vote of the Capital Planning Commission. Yeah, I'm getting a little late here. The Community Preservation Committee has printed in their report Ready? All in favor, please press 1 for yes, 2 for no. If you're in favor of the report, press 1 for yes, 2 for no. 68.
I move that all articles currently on the table be taken from the table.
All in favor? Opposed? All articles are off the table. That brings us back to Article 35. Yeah, technically. All in favor of putting Article 3 back on the table, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? Good catch, Mr. Schlickman. That brings us to Article 35. Ms. Mahan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. With your permission and my colleagues on town meeting, I would request that Article 35 as well as Article 50, which is local option short-term rental impact fees, sort of go in concert with each other. If I could ask Attorney Heim to speak to both Article 35 and 50 at this time.
Attorney Heim.
Doug Heim, Town Council. If pull up the slides. So Article 35 and Article 50 speak to our options under a new law passed by the legislature just in December of 2018. Next slide, please. I want to start with the state law for just a moment because it helps to sort of give the context for what's going on both with the option and our regulatory authority. So Chapter 337 of the Acts of 2018, an act regulating and insuring short-term rentals, basically amends the provisions of the general laws which regulate similar businesses, hotels, bed and breakfasts, in order to establish a scheme for registering, regulating, and taxing, of course, short-term rentals. Next slide, please. So just in case this wasn't clear from the bylaw, short-term rentals defined under state law are basically apartments, houses, cottages, rooms, any accommodation that's not a hotel, a motel, lodging house, or something that was otherwise regulated. The second piece of their definition is they have to be reserved in advance. Usually most of us are thinking about Airbnb, VRBO, other online platforms reserving these types of accommodations. And they have to be for sleeping and living purposes not more than 31 consecutive calendar days. So that's the operative timeline. You're basically talking about something that's not currently regulated under some other scheme, like hotel rooms or bed and breakfasts are. It has to be an advanced reservation system, and it's got to be for something shorter than 31 consecutive calendar days. And just a quick note on that, for anybody who's concerned about it, a tenancy at will, basically someone who's on a month-to-month lease, who's otherwise been a long-term residential tenant, isn't covered by this law. Next slide, please. The primary provisions of the state scheme is one, it requires all short-term rentals be registered with the state. So we're not asking to do something that the state is not already requiring Airbnbs and VRBOs to do. You have to register with the state. Second, it imposes a 5.7% state tax on short-term rentals. And third, it requires $1 million in liability insurance coverage for each stay by the owner of the place to be rented or by the platform. Next slide, please. Now, the law also created a few, what I'm just calling loosely, local option provisions. The first was a local room occupancy tax of up to 6%. Now, remember I said previously that they're basically amending an existing law that covers hotel rooms and bed and breakfasts. We already adopted this particular occupancy tax back in 2010. So we're all covered there. That tax will apply to any Airbnb-style rentals in Arlington. Second, it gives us the option to also assess what's called a local community impact fee, an option of up to 3% under Chapter 64F. That's going to be covered in Article 52, and I'll touch on that very briefly at the end of my remarks. And then third, it allows us to establish certain local regulations on operators to promote health, safety, and other valid purposes. Next slide, please. So you can't rent this place as an Airbnb, but I thought it was better than taking pictures of other people's houses. And you'll get a gold star if you can identify all these Arlington historic houses. When we were coming up with this local regulation proposal, we wanted to really keep it simple. Focus on eligibility, registration, standards, and complaint resolution. Next slide, please. So under the bylaws as proposed, eligibility. You've got to be locally registered. You can't be an affordable or income-restricted unit. You can't be an accessory dwelling unit. And you can't have a premises that's subject to 3 or more violations within the last 6 months. In other words, we don't want to put somebody on the registry and allow them to operate something like an Airbnb if they've got 3 complaints within the last 6 months for something like excessive noise, improper trash disposal, or disorderly conduct. Next slide. Registration and standards. Again, we don't also want to impose unnecessary layer of sort of bureaucracy on folks who are already getting adjusted to a new state regulatory scheme. So folks will register for a 1-year term, basically January to December, with the Select Board's office. It's $25 per bedroom per unit. It has to identify the operator, the owner, or the agent for the property, identify the address, and other relevant information like that. And then finally, they have to certify compliance with existing health, safety, and use codes. Next slide, please. Finally, it provides for a complaint resolution and penalties. There aren't a lot of Airbnbs in Arlington. Our best guess is that there's less than 100. But when folks complain about them, there hasn't really been a ready-made place to go to. So the bylaws we proposed, it allows for 2 categories of complaint. One, somebody who's operating an Airbnb that hasn't been registered. I'm sorry, I keep picking on Airbnb. It's any short-term rental. Failure to register or operating prohibited units. And then the second is basically a violation of all other codes, bylaws, and abatement orders. It also yields 2 different kinds of penalties. One is a $300 per day per unit fine for the operation of a short-term rental that's not on the registry. And the second, speaking more to violation of these other codes, bylaws, and abatement orders, is suspension from the short-term registry, which in turn prohibits operation. So if you're running a short-term rental and you're not complying with local sanitary codes, you get a complaint, you get suspended. If you try to operate it, then you're starting to get those fines for $300 a day. Next slide, please. Complaints are lodged with the select board. The select board will refer to an appropriate town department or body. It's not going to take the jurisdiction from the Board of Health or the Zoning Board of Appeals or somebody else who has a vested right to basically preside over violations of the sanitary code, for example. But those folks can report back to the select board for a resolution of the complaint. Finally, there's a right to a hearing, and the process overall is compliance-oriented. If you give me one more minute. Next slide. So all this also ties into Article 50, short-term rental impact fees. The very short version of this is that we get to assess this additional 3% impact fee, similar to an excise tax, and that works out to be about $3 to $6 on our less expensive rentals in Arlington, which are usually like a room in a house that might be $100 to $200 a night, and $15 to $30 on our most expensive short-term rentals that we were able to identify, which are $500 to $1,000 a night. The impact fee can be assessed against either just professionally managed units or and/or owner-occupied units. So that is town meeting's option. You don't have to assess it against folks who are renting out part of a home that they live in, but you do have the option to assess it against both of those entities. And finally, the fee is general fund revenue, but it's partially restricted. 35% of what we spend on any funds generated from the impact fee has to be dedicated to affordable housing or local infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moore? Yeah, Mr. Moore? I got you.
Christopher Moore, Precinct 14. Under item C, Section 4, item C, we require the operator certifies that they are compliant with a number of different things: the state sanitary code, food safe certification, the Arlington Health Code, fire carbon monoxide requirements, fire escape building code, and the Arlington zoning bylaw. My question is, how does the operator go about doing that? Do they need to get each of these entities to inspect the facility, or do they just say, yes, I'm in compliance?
Mr. Heim?
Doug Heim, Town Council. It's a good question. I don't think we envision a requirement that each one of these units necessarily be inspected. I think what we want is for those folks to engage in a conversation with the relevant boards and bodies and make sure that they're in compliance. If they're not sure about whether or not they need to have another means of egress, they should be contacting the fire department and the inspectional services. If they have questions about whether or not they can serve food, they need to know that they're required and the affirmative duty is on them to get in touch with the health department and make sure they've got all relevant certifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ms. LaCourte?
Annie LaCourte, Precinct 15. Mr. Hyam, do I understand that what you just said is that you're expecting some sort of like honor behavior on the part of the operators to check that they're like, we're not going to proactively reach out to these people at all?
So we're requiring folks to register. So we'll have an idea of who these folks are.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to be sensitive to the fact that asking all of our different departments to go out and affirmatively conduct an inspection is a lot to potentially add to their plate. So it is a complaint-driven system. It is also a system where we need to gather a little bit of information about how many of these are really operating before we might make any sort of tweaks to it. But I think that the short answer is, yeah, I think we're expecting that folks are going to have to come before the select board office, say that they've met these requirements. If they don't, they're subject to penalties and fines and being taken off the registry. The last thing I'll say is that the reason being on the registry is so important is, again, this isn't just us. It's also the state. If you don't pay us, that's one thing. If you don't pay state the money that they're looking for and you haven't registered with them, that's another. So I think we'll be looking to combine the state's registry with our registry and make sure that we capture all the folks who are operating these types of businesses.
So I'm not sure that you entirely answered my concern. Perhaps the town manager could expand a little bit on his intentions around the implementation of this and whether or not we are going to, in some way that is user-friendly and proactive, reach out to these operators and explain to them how or what they need to do to be in compliance et cetera? And do we have staff that can cover that additional work burden?
Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. I'm not sure that we today are going to be able to proactively reach out to them until the state's registry is established. I think once that's established, we'll have a better sense of how we can reach out to them. But I think what Town Council has been saying is that when they come in to register with the Select Board, we will make sure they're talking to the proper departments so that they can credibly state that they are in compliance with the bylaw. And again, if we come back, there's a very good chance we come back a year from now and there's far more of these units than we currently think there is, and we need to have a resource discussion. At this point, though, we are comfortable with what we think there are for units in this type of use that our current resources can get this job done.
Okay, so let me make sure that I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that when they come to register with the Board of Selectmen, you'll provide them with some kind of information about a process that they need to pursue to be sure that they're in compliance with all of these rules, and that you will provide them with our usual warm, friendly customer service to help guide them through this process and make them feel good about it.
I am saying that.
Thank you. In case you're wondering, I'm very much in support of this article. I do think that it's important, both for the community and for the operators, that we have some regulation, some agreement, that protects everybody from potential disaster. I just wanted to be sure we actually have an ability to implement. And as usual, between our town council and our town manager, I believe I've gotten the answer to my question. We do have a plan, and they will continue to monitor the situation and come back to us with further requests should we need further regulation.
Thank you. Ms. Seuss, did you have your hand up?
Jennifer Seuss, Precinct 3. I have run an Airbnb for the last 5 years. The reason we did this is we have family visiting for about 6 weeks out of the year, and we don't have a guest room. And so as we were looking at when we bought our new house, and we were renovating, that sort of seemed to be the best solution to accommodate our family and not have them sleep on the couch, which was the other option. I am in favor of all of these regulations with one exception. I think the registration is great. I definitely want more money for the town. But I wonder why the restriction is for 31 days. So about a third of my rentals are grandparents who have kids who are having babies and they live in small apartments and they can't accommodate their parents. And so a lot of people come and stay. So about a third of my rentals are that. And those people often stay for 5, 6, 7 weeks. Another significant source, about another third, are people who come to teach at Harvard or at MIT. We have a really lovely apartment, full kitchen, gorgeous. And so it attracts families, it attracts older people, and they often come for 6 weeks. And so I really worry about the 31 days. Also, I just want to say that I suspect that there are actually more than 100. My apartment is not on the market right now, so it's not listed anywhere because we're taking over for personal use. But I'm not sure once the state regulations get into effect what's going to happen. The state regulations require a certain kind of insurance that we actually have, but not everyone has. And so if that's enforced, I suspect that actually we'll have very few, which unfortunately means less money for Arlington. So I love the idea of money, I love the idea of regulations, but I do really wonder why we have the 31 days. Actually, if someone could someone explain it, that'd be great.
Doug Heim, Town Council. The 31 days is set forth in the state's law. So we're trying to keep things consistent with the state's registry.
Okay. Yeah, the state has more problems. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Deist? Mr. Revelak?
Steve Revelak, Precinct 1, 111 Sunnyside Avenue. Mr. Moderator, I'm aware that one of the requirements in this article is compliance with the zoning bylaw of the town of Arlington. Given the number of pre-existing non-conforming houses or dwelling units, whatnot in town, does this imply that a pre-existing non-conforming unit cannot serve as a short-term rental location?
Mr. Heim?
Doug Heim, Town Council. The general answer to that is no. If you've got a legal prior nonconformance, you're not actually in violation of the zoning bylaw. You couldn't build that today, maybe, but you've got a lawful unit. What we're really speaking about more is illegal apartments, which unfortunately we have, and we do have a lot of complaints that get investigated and resolved by inspectional services. But that's what we're really getting at,
Okay.
illegal apartments. Thank you.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Yantar?
Timur Kaya Yantar, Precinct 7. Mr. Moderator, I move to end debate on Article 35 and all matters before it.
Motion to terminate debate on Article 35. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? No. And it's a two-thirds vote, and I so declare it. Debate is terminated. That brings us to the recommended vote of Article 35. It's printed by the selectmen in their report. If you're in favor of Article 35, please press 1 for yes and 2 for no. Yeah, we'll do 50. All right, voting's open. 1 for yes, 2 for no. It's a positive vote, 202 in the affirmative, 10 in the negative. It's a vote, and I so declare it. That ends Article 35. Chair's going to move to table everything between Article 36 and 49 so we can take a vote on 50 as well, which is the taxing portion of this, so we can get some money from these Airbnbs. All in favor of tabling Articles 36 through 39, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? They are so tabled. Now we have before us Article 50, local option short-term rental impact fees. Anyone wish to discuss that? Sir.
Peter Gast, Precinct 2. I had a very hopefully short question. That is, Mr. Heim mentioned that we have an option of either doing only professional or professional and owner-occupied units. I'm wondering which of those options is before us right now.
Mr. Heim?
Yeah. Doug Heim, Town Council. The recommended vote of the Select Board is to adopt both so that you treat essentially agent-operated and owner-occupied short-term rentals the same way.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else wish to discuss the article? Seeing none, we're ready for a vote. All in favor of adopting the local option short-term rental impact fees, please press 1 for yes, and 2 if you do not want to accept those. 50. $202 in the positive and 12 in the negative. It's a vote, and I so declare it. That ends Article 50. All in favor of taking 36 through 49 off the table, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? That brings us to Article 36. We're just bouncing all around here. Ms. Mahan.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 36, as you can see, is before you to vote in an election modernization study group. This is a very ambitious and clear time frame committee that we tried to have as great depth as we could in terms of individuals who need to be on there. It has a very specific charge that has other implementations that will come out of that. There are 9 that are listed in here. I think one of the things this committee will do in an extremely timely fashion is answer some of the questions that were posed here tonight about elections and equipment and the like, because one of the charges is to report on the status of the town's voting equipment and options for improvements. And as you can see, we put in here that we anticipate by September 1st that the town clerk and select board will receive a preliminary report from this committee that will tell us of some things that basically we're pretty sure we know we should be implementing and should be doing it, but we want to make sure that we're doing it correctly in the most efficient way. And then this committee would report back to a full report to town meeting, our colleagues here in town meeting in 2020, and at the end of the, it's anticipated at the end of the annual 2020 town meeting, the committee would be dissolved. And the reason I point that out, this is a committee that has a lot of work to do, but we're pretty cognizant of what that work is, like other cities and towns that are also embarking on this. So I would ask my colleagues on town meeting to vote for forming this very ambitious, wide-ranging committee that really is going to get a lot of good work done on elections, how they operate, what equipment, all those other questions, and anything that will spring forth from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Moore had an amendment and someone else did. Ma'am, you go first. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move consideration of my amendment to Article 36.
Do you have
please.
a second?
Thank you.
Name and precinct.
Krista Kelleher, Precinct 5. As the person who submitted this warrant article along with the other signers, I'm very pleased that the Select Board has so enthusiastically supported the establishment of a study committee to consider ways of improving the town's electoral system and practices. I'm also grateful that the Select Board has set out a clear and aggressive, ambitious for certain, timeline and has requested both interim and final reports aligned with upcoming electoral cycles. I wanted to see the study committee formed for 2 reasons. First, it's imperative that we do everything possible to ensure that our electoral system functions effectively. Arlington leads in so many ways, from our high-quality educational system to our noteworthy environmental initiatives to our steadfast commitment to restorative justice. Residents of our community also want Arlington to lead when it comes to its electoral system and engaging residents in the democratic process as fully as possible. This town's residents deserve an electoral process that keeps pace with the times. In addition, we should hold ourselves to high standards when it comes to elections. This may mean that changes are needed to strengthen voting rights, increase registration and turnout, and make our vote counting more efficient, such as having new machines. It probably won't surprise you that towns and cities all over the U.S. are exploring ways to reinvigorate the electorate and improve their electoral processes. Here in Massachusetts, other communities have examined how to enhance their electoral system by taking a systematic and in-depth look at what exists and what adjustments may be in order. For instance, Somerville convened a clean and open elections task force last year. In their report, the task force recommended 16 separate reforms, ranging from changing the time of elections to increased turnout to improving outreach to voting age high school students. This is just one example of the kinds of changes being considered by a neighboring community. Second, as a resident of Arlington for nearly 19 years, I am aware of the tremendous value of study groups and committees that identify best practices in the field and consider what is most appropriate for our town. I've seen time and time again how useful it is to bring individuals from across the community to tackle important matters through systematic analysis. It's time for our electoral system to be the focus of such a study. This brings me to the amendment that I hope you will support this evening in order to ensure that the study committee benefits fully from the expertise of town officials and the active participation of residents. I seek slight modifications to the committee's composition. In keeping with the original intention of the concept I brought to the Select Board, I propose increasing the number of individuals on the committee from 11 to 13. The amendment also stipulates that at least 2 residents appointed to the committee be town meeting members. Finally, it ensures that the appointed and elected town officials on the committee are able to serve in a consultative role by openly sharing their perspectives, contributing their institutional knowledge and expertise, and weighing in on matters under consideration. The amendment enhances the ability of those members serving in their official capacity to offer valuable insights as ex officio non-voting members and avoid the appearance of any conflict of interest. In addition to the input provided by these town officials and residents who are appointed, I hope that the committee will invite individuals with relevant experience who are knowledgeable on best practices across the state, and particularly in communities similar to ours in Arlington, to also participate in public forums or hearings held by the committee. This amendment may have already been incorporated into the main motion, but with the long and complex warrant this year, there wasn't enough time to refine that language or this language earlier in the process, which is why we have the amendment that I have filed. In terms of Mr. Moore's amendment, I share the concerns outlined by Mr. Moore and understand the intention of his amendment. However, I think his concerns are largely obviated by my amendment. While correct that the composition in the main motion might be a bit too prescriptive, my amendment increases the number of seats for town meeting members and provides some extra flexibility to the moderator if individuals with the desired demographic characteristics cannot be identified. There may be many paths to improving our current electoral system. An in-depth exploration of what is working well, where there is room for improvement, and what potential modifications are possible will go far to ensure that our system operates most inclusively and effectively. The residents of Arlington deserve nothing less. Thank you for considering this amendment. I ask that you act favorably on it and vote to support the motion as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
Christopher Moore, Precinct 14. I move to amend the Select Board's recommended vote by removing all specific qualifications for town residents who are appointed by the moderator.
Second? Second.
Thank you. As the previous speaker noted, I think this set of requirements that the Select Board proposed are laudable in the sense that they try to bring additional voices into the committee. I think they're too prescriptive, however, and that putting them in the call for applications will serve to limit applications rather than to help us get the broadest group of people. I think the time to balance the diversity of viewpoint, experience, and expertise is when the moderator has these applications in his hands and has interviewed whoever he feels is appropriate. So I think we should give the moderator the discretion to have the largest and most diverse applicant pool and then make the choice from there. The intention of my amendment is that it would be voted after the initial amendment, and that it would act on on whatever exists at that point to remove the specific requirements only. So if we go with the Select Board motion, it would leave us with 3 town residents appointed by the moderator, and if it's amended by the earlier amendment, we would have 5 town residents appointed by the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schlickman?
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9, and for identification, member of the Arlington School Committee. Being a member of the school committee is a time-consuming process. It takes a lot of nights out. There are a lot of meetings that are not school committee meetings that we need to attend in order to fulfill this. It is an unpaid volunteer job. There's no really inherent conflict of interest involved. So that if you are offering us an opportunity, in my opinion, to serve as a non-voting ex officio member, that's an assignment that I particularly don't want to do, because that's sort of like asking me to come to Thanksgiving dinner but saying, you can come, but don't eat the stuffing, okay? So I would urge, I'm agnostic on the Second Amendment. I would urge you to defeat Ms. Kelleher's amendment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Yontar?
Timur Kayantar, Precinct 7. Mr. Moderator, regarding Article 36, I see in Section 2, Committee Charge, 9 specific goals laid out. But taking a step back, my question through you is, does this committee's scope also include the broad objectives of, first, increasing the availability and distribution of election information to voters, second, increasing voter turnout, and third, making it easier for town residents who wish to serve to run for office?
Ms. Mahan?
I'm sorry, your first question.
First, increasing the availability and distribution of election information to voters.
I'm certain this committee will consider that and give a report back. I'm not really sure. Under the 9, I can see it stemming from that, and I'll be happy to pass that along as something for them to discuss. I know it's not a specific stated charge here, but I think what we did in naming the 9 was we gave enough leniency for other questions that aren't in there.
Okay, so also second, increasing voter turnout, and third, making it easier for town residents who wish to serve to run for office.
I'm hoping that the whole purpose of this committee is increasing voter turnout, because that's one of the things they're going to look at in terms of how we hold our elections and what we do to get the best times and best ways for voters to come out. And did you say helping by getting more people out to vote, it's going to help get people elected?
Okay, I think it's basically in the spirit of the wording, even if not the letter of the wording. So I hope that's what you pass on to them. Second, this may be for you or maybe for someone else, but so I would like to ask through the moderator about Section 1, membership and organization. As noted, there are 11, or if the First Amendment is passed, 13 highly specific slots to be filled. My first question is, how does one put him or herself forward to be considered for any of these slots? And my second question is, how will people in the town be made aware of the opportunity?
Ms. Mahan?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Diane Mahan. All of the committee memberships are pretty well defined, with the exception of the 3 or 5 residents, and that would be an appointment, as it states, through the town moderator, and I would anticipate he would advertise as he does other town meeting positions.
So, like through the advocate, for example?
Yes, and I'm sure some other, I'm not sure how he does it.
There's also a spot on the town webpage for a committee of volunteer positions.
So I've seen the website and the advocate listings, and I think, though, that if we're trying to broaden elections through this committee's work, shouldn't we also reach out as broadly as possible to those who might wish to serve, who perhaps don't subscribe to the advocate, don't have a regular habit of visiting the town website, and so forth?
We'll take all suggestions you want to make.
Okay. Thank you for listening. I plan to vote in favor.
Thank you. This woman over here, 4th row back on the edge. Yep.
Hi, I'm Leslie Waxman from Precinct 6, and I'm also the Assistant Director of the Cambridge Election Commission, where we've been running ranked choice elections since 1941, although I've only been doing it for 10 years. Whenever any city or town in Massachusetts is considering ranked choice, they usually call us. They always call Cambridge first with questions about costs and logistics, voter education, and those calls always go to me. So I've provided advice and information on ranked choice voting to municipal officials, study groups, academics, advocacy groups all over the country. I'm actually very excited about the work that this committee could do. I would love to be a part of it, but I'm a U.S. citizen. I've lived in Arlington for 6 years, and I did graduate high school. However, I do have 10 years of experience implementing ranked choice voting and all of the other items that are on this list. So I do think Arlington should take advantage of that, and I support the amendment to remove the qualifications for town residents. And even if I can't be on the committee, I hope that they would make use of, I can still be a resource to the members. Thank you.
I claim Ms. Wexler as one of my designees. Ms. Olszewski?
Angela Olszewski, Precinct 17, and co-president of the League of Women Voters of Arlington. And we support this article, regardless of which committee composition is chosen.
Thank you, Ms. Olszewski. The woman next to Mr. Hayner.
I'm Samantha Dutra, Precinct 20. I move the motion to terminate debate.
On the article and all matters under it?
In the article and all matters proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion to terminate debate in the article and all matters under it. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? That's a 2/3 vote, and I so declare it. We have before us Ms. Kelleher's amendment, who rejiggers the whole committee. We have Mr. Moore's amendment, who eliminates some qualifications, and we have the recommended vote of the Board of Selectmen. So first we're going to vote on Ms. Kelleher's amendment, and then we'll vote on Mr. Moore's, then we'll vote on the final vote. So as soon as Tim's ready, go ahead, vote in favor of Ms. Kelleher's amendment, please press 1. If you're against her amendment, please press 2. It's an affirmative vote, 109. And the positive 84, so the amendment is carried. We now have Mr. Moore's amendment to eliminate the qualifications under the moderator's position. If you're in favor of Mr. Moore's amendment, please press 1. No. Not at this stage. Chris. Wait, hold your clock, Tim.
Christopher Moore, Precinct 14. I believe the text of my amendment said something close to removing the qualifications for the town moderator's appointees.
Yes.
Does not specify the number. So the number is now 5. I think the amendment would now keep it at 5.
Yeah, it's not going
Okay.
to change the amendment. It's just going to change the qualifications.
Correct.
Yeah. So we don't have to, we can just cross out the word 3 if that's upsetting people. Okay, ready, Tim? All right, if you're in favor of Mr. Moore's amendment, please press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Yeah, I got to reset that, Tim. Okay. That's a positive vote, 152 to 47. That's a vote. Now it's going to bring us to the final vote of the Board of Selectmen, of the Select Board, as amended by Ms. Kelleher's and Mr. Moore's amendment. All in favor of that final vote, please press 1 for yes, 2 for no. $188 in the positive, 9 in the negative. That's a vote, and I so declare it. That ends Article 36 and brings us to Article 37. Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dan Dunn, Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen. So first, reviewing the vote on this article, Mr. Curo and Ms. Rowe and myself, we voted in favor of this change. Mr. Hurd and Mrs. Mahan were opposed to it, and Mr. DeCourcy has informed me that he would have voted no had he been on the board at the time. So that's the score. The reason that we voted to support it is because the civil service process, there's two big reasons that I'm going to cite. The first one is that it dramatically limits the pool of available candidates, and it imposes a fairly arcane process on how that pool is interviewed. And we, as a majority, believe that the civil service process for hiring a chief is broken and antiquated, and for it to serve Arlington, it needs to be radically reformed. This is not a unique position held by the board, by the select board. There are quite a number of people who wish to reform civil service in Massachusetts, but it is a very difficult topic to reform because of the involvements. All that said, the town manager has committed to hiring the next police chief from inside the Arlington department. So much of the change of the civil service simply doesn't apply because the town manager has committed to make that internal hire. So now, many of you are sitting there saying, okay, so if we're hiring internally, then why are we even talking about this particular issue? And that's what point number 2 is, which is the management control of the police chief. Under civil service, the town manager has very limited recourse if he disagrees with some of the policies being implemented by the police chief. I'd like us to consider what would happen if we had, which I'm very glad that we do not. I'm very happy with our previous police chief, and I'm very happy with our acting police chief. But let's imagine that we had someone in that position who we were less happy with. Imagine if there was too much complaints about excessive force. Imagine if there was racial profiling. Imagine if the police chief was cooperating with ICE during arrests. How would we as a town meeting feel about that? What would happen if the police chief was not supportive of our trust/sanctuary town policy? If the town manager was not in favor of those things, I can tell you what would happen. The select board would have a hearing and we'd fire him, and then we'd hire somebody who supported the values that Arlington holds. Under civil service, the town manager does not have that level of control and cannot fire a police chief for reasons of that type. This is not to say that if we remove the police chief from civil service, the police chief is without protection. The police chief continues to be protected by a number of Massachusetts laws, some of which are cited in the selectmen's comments. Finally, just a little bit about how widespread this practice is. Within the town of Massachusetts, 66 of the 351 towns, approximately 19%, the police chief is still in civil service. One of those is Lexington, which voted 2 weeks ago to remove the police chief from civil service, in fact, remove the entire department from civil service. We also talk about sometimes the town manager 12, which is the 12 comparable communities to Arlington. Of those 4, the police chief is in the civil service. So I'm sure I have every expectations you're going to hear arguments to the contrary, but I ask you for your support for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Ms. Mahan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Diane Mahan, originally in the minority on the previous board, I guess now with Mr. DeCourcy in the majority. What we're talking about here is a civil service police chief. One of my core principles that I really have stood by since I was elected in 1999 is having a civil service police chief. The reason for that, and it's outlined in the law, and this is the only time I'm going to read legalese to everybody. The purpose of the law is to enforce basic merit principles for recruiting, selecting, and advancing of employees on the basis of their relative ability, knowledge, and skills. So that's one, in terms of what kind of person, how you move your way up through the ranks. And ensuring that all employees, meaning civil service police chief, are protected against coercion for political purposes and protected from arbitrary and capricious actions. When I first got on the board in 1999, same thing came before us. Take the police chief out of civil service. Then board voted 4-1, myself in the minority, and I came up with all these arguments of why you need a civil service police chief. Not only to protect the chief, but to protect the people in the department, the police officers and the people that they serve. The whole purpose of having a civil service police chief, and I would respectfully disagree, is to keep the politics out of the top spot in the police chief job. 1999, we voted to take it out. We had several, as we do now, highly qualified candidates that we did not choose from. In 2002, the then town manager, who was not Mr. Markey or Mr. Sullivan, it was an individual in between, then town council, John Marr, as well as a full vote of the board, 5-0, voted to put the then chief, Ryan, in with the protections of a civil service chief. Captain Paul Conroy wrote a letter that he put up from the ranking officers that he put up at the back of the room, and basically he cites that the individuals I cited previously all made arguments the position be returned to civil service. Their arguments in favor of the issue were varied, but they all agreed that the title of a civil service chief and the perceived authority that came with it augmented the chief's standing as a leader among their subordinates, and also grants the chief the authority and autonomy needed to run effectively the department to accomplish its mission. So since 2002, there were 3 years, we've had a civil service police chief, and the then town council, town manager, and majority of the board came to the realization that I had from the beginning that you really need to have, for the police chief I'm talking about. Now, one of the other things that I would point out is we have highly qualified candidates. I can tell you in terms of the ranking officers that are over there, even to date, under Chief Ryan, we've had Captain McLaughlin, who's Chief of Police in Belmont. We've had Captain Bongiorno, who's Police Chief in Bedford. The thought of that we have to relax the rules and water them down, or however you want to say it, to get a wider pool of candidates, I don't think you do that with the police chief. The way I equate it to is, say you're a state-of-the-art clinic, Framingham Heart Study. Say you're a leading Boston teaching hospital, Mass General, Brigham and Women's. You go out and you have an opening for a physician. That's when you kind of lax the rules, relax them, and say, you know what, we'll take someone that, you know, has gone through medical school, internship and fellowship, residency and fellowship, but hasn't taken the boards. But that's okay, because they're coming at the ground up. Now you take that same institution, which is how I equate the police chief, and you're looking for a chief of neurology, you're looking for a chief of oncology, otolaryngology, whatever. That's the time that you don't lax the requirements. And I equate similar to if you were looking for a chief of pediatric surgery, you would say, you know what, I want someone who's boarded. I want someone who took the written and oral boards, passed them successfully, has gone out to recertified, has also taken, you know, continuing medical education credits. I want to see how much time they're in the field, in the operating room, how many surgeries they do. To me, the same thing by having a civil service chief, that's what you're getting as a parallel. Civil service chief tells you that individual, he or she has worked their way up through the ranks, have studied for, taken and passed a written and oral exam to become a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain, has had continuing education units, courses, going out to learn about, you know, various police enforcements, opioid training, things like that. And I think to open it up to a wider field, to me personally, is saying that some feel that we don't have qualified candidates who have worked their way up through the ranks, taken all the training, taken the written and oral exams, gotten recertified, taken every course that they need to take every year, have had on-the-job experience here in Arlington. To me, that's what this is saying, and I can tell you that's not the case. So I would implore you, on behalf of the police department, myself personally speaking, to retain the protections under a civil service police chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahan. Mr. Jefferson?
Bob Jeffson, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, I request that Arlington resident Brian Gallagher be allowed to address the meeting.
If he's a resident, he can address the meeting.
My name is Brian Gallagher. I live at 173 Mountain Ave in Arlington. I'm also a detective sergeant for the Arlington Police, and I'm a member of the Ranking Officers Association. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Chiefs. Thank you, Select Board members, and thank you, Town Meeting members. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Arlington Police Ranking Officers Association with the hope that you will vote against Arlington Town Meeting Warrant Article 37 and attempt to remove the Arlington Chief of Police position from the authority of the Massachusetts Civil Service Commission and Human Resources Division, HRD. This issue has been the subject of intense debate and much scrutiny in the past. As recently as 2002, when the title was placed back under the purview of HRD, the former town manager, the former town council, and the recently retired Chief of Police Fred Ryan all made the argument that the position should be returned to civil service. They all agreed that the title of a civil service chief and the perceived authority that came with it augmented the chief's standing as a leader amongst his subordinates. It also granted the chief the authority and autonomy needed to effectively run the department in order to accomplish its mission. Former Chief Ryan himself stated in 2002 that keeping the position out of civil service compromises my leadership, and without that leadership, it is difficult to manage the organization. A job title under HRD does not necessarily afford any additional job protections, as most, if not all, chiefs' contracts provide just clause provisions. Nor does an HRD job title provide any additional financial incentives. It does, however, provide continuity and credibility, which is vital to the future success of our organization. When the town went through this process in 2002, then Chief Ryan, a staunch supporter of returning the title to civil service, spoke in front of town meetings saying, "If it's not broken, don't fix it. If it is broken, fix it. And I suggest to you that it's broken." Well, this situation was fixed, and we think the last 17 years have been a testament to that effect. We pride ourselves on being a progressive, professional law enforcement agency. As an organization, we're committed to the values of the community, and we've exceeded national standards for municipal policing on many fronts. We are proud of the partnerships that we've developed with our fellow community stakeholders, and we look forward to maintaining and improving these relationships in the future. That said, the progress we've made as an organization cannot be attributed to just one individual. It takes an all-hands-on-deck effort with the department, sworn and civilian alike, committed to those ideals and ready to do the work at the line level on a daily basis. The Arlington Police Department is an organization that develops and nurtures leaders. In fact, over the years, we've lost valuable members of our command staff who've moved on to become chiefs of police for neighboring communities. We believe that our members are more than qualified to lead the department now and in the future. We look forward to the town's leadership staying the course and ensuring a smooth and professional transition process, which includes a civil service police chief. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ruderman? Mr. Marr?
John Marr, Precinct 14. I stand in support of the recommended vote of the majority of the Select Board. For those of you who don't know me, I had the privilege of being Arlington's Town Council from 1974 to 2008. As such, I became very familiar with the provisions of the Civil Service Law, Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 31. For our purposes tonight, I think we need only focus on two major provisions, namely its requirements relative to hiring and its requirements relating to discipline and discharge for those individuals subject to its provisions. The original rationale for the Civil Service Law was to remove from political and other undue influence hiring decisions that were to be made based solely upon merit. Only those who scored high on tests were to be eligible for appointment. Subsequent to its original passage, other considerations could be taken into account, but the basis for appointment, still is largely based on how one does on an exam given by the state for the particular job in question. The law has largely succeeded in its original goal in both the labor and official classification sectors. It does, however, have major drawbacks. For instance, one could attain a perfect score on an exam and still not be appointed, since an individual scoring a few points lower could jump over the perfect score candidate by virtue of getting bonus points for being a veteran, for instance. I am a veteran myself, and I recognize the partial merit of favoring someone who has served our country, but only, I think, in the lower ranking jobs, and not so much for those critical high-ranking public safety jobs requiring so much discretion and judgment. And judging, for instance, interpersonal skills. Those can't be tested on a test score. I suggest that it also serves as an impediment to appointment for female candidates who are somewhat less likely to have served in the armed services. The principal argument in favor of keeping the police chief in civil service is that it insulates him or her from easy removal by the appointing authority. But this concern is obviated by other provisions of state law that permit a police chief to negotiate a contract with the municipality that governs fringe benefits and other matters, including dismissal only for just cause, the very provision that exists in the civil service law. Prior police chiefs in Arlington have availed themselves of this provision. You have heard tonight from Ms. Mahan and the gentleman from the ranking officers, and from a handout that has been passed out before by the Arlington Ranking Officers Association, in which I was quoted in 2002 before town meeting, advocating at that time for a return of the police chief's position to civil service. One could say how sometimes we all may from one time or another regret statements made in our callow youth, at that time my tender age of 57. I'm now a more seasoned, if not wiser, 73, and this, by the way, is my 46th annual town meeting. However, that statement that I made then needs context, since at that time special circumstances applied, and I think that advice was appropriate at that time. The town had previously experimented with the establishment of a Department of Community Safety, which combined both the police and fire departments, headed by a director of community safety, appointed by the then town manager. The position of police chief was abolished by virtue of the authority given to the town manager under the Town Manager Act. The manager simultaneously established the position of Director of Police Services and a Director of Fire and Support Services, both of whom reported to the Director of Community Safety. This arrangement had several drawbacks, and a different town manager in 2002 decided to abandon it. However, the civil service status of the police chief was unclear, and it was then felt that the legislative enactment referred to, and which I supported in 2002, would serve to clarify the situation, at least for the time being. That was 17 years ago, and the town benefited greatly during that time period, during the tenure of Chief Fred Ryan. But with Fred's retirement, I'm of the firm view that the town manager should have unfettered discretion in choosing an individual best qualified to perform the vital functions of this key post. In Arlington, we have what is referred to as a strong Town Manager Act, and it has served the town well since its inception in 1952 by giving the town manager full discretion to choose the best possible candidate for department head provisions. By having a professional town manager, Arlington has succeeded in removing political influences, the original goal of the civil service law. I should note that no other town department except the fire chief is appointed subject to the constraints of the civil service law. I hasten to add my considerable esteem for the Arlington Ranking Officers Association, whose members have served the town well in a highly professional and effective way. I had many occasions to deal with many of its members who now serve in senior positions in the town Police Department when I served the town in my dual capacity as Director of Labor Relations. I applaud the town manager's representation that he intends to appoint a chief from within the department. I can think of several members of that organization who would serve with distinction as chief. But the choice as to who that individual will be has to be within the sole discretion of the manager, unfettered by the constraints of what is now, in many respects, an unwieldy and outdated civil service law. I urge your support for the recommended vote of the Select Board under Article 37. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, any notices of do you have Al's reconsiderations? No, we have to ask for notice of reconsideration first, then we move to adjourn. Any notices of reconsideration? Mr. Tosti's moved for reconsideration of 58 and 68. Any others? Motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned till Monday.